Well, it's that time. We gotta get started on my favorite part and actually start making the GUI. It's important we do all the background information, but I know sometimes it can be a little bit exhausting. But it is important to help you have a better developed code in the long run. So do it. If you didn't do it, go back, watch that video first, figure it out. I'm assuming that you've already watched the video on the development of ideas and also the video on how to create that first figure. If you didn't watch the one on how to create the first figure, this may be somewhat intuitive, but I am already starting with that because again, we already went over that in the previous video. I'm opening up my script file that I already did in the previous video where I created that first main figure. I'm not going to start with that for my first figure because if you remember, we talked about doing like a welcome message or something like that. I'm going to start here with a dialog box. That way I can show an example of how to use dialog boxes just in case you decide to go that route. If you're doing something very simple, you may prefer just to do dialog boxes rather than diving in and doing a full graphical user interface. So if you notice right here, I'm putting in text and I want to put an apostrophe S. So one thing to remember, and I've talked about this in other string videos, is if you want an apostrophe, you need to do 2 apostrophes. Otherwise, it's thinking you want it to end the string. When I put 2, then it knows, okay, I just wanted an apostrophe as part of the text that I'm writing. There's a lot of things like this that will come up as we're coding. Sometimes we'll come across a problem, we don't know why it's happening, and a lot of it will be trial and error, but some of it you might learn it ahead of time. If you don't, that's okay. Just know like there's always going to be answers out there. You can always look for more, and I'll try to give you insight on different little things like this and come across little problems like this as we're going through the graphical user interface. That way we can talk about it as we go along. When I run my code, it's stopping right here. I already included the uiwait built-in function. If I didn't include that, then it wouldn't wait for me as the user to interact with this. So it waits to pop up this full screen. So I'm going to go here and just show you what I'm talking about. So that time, see how I just popped up the message and then it immediately popped up the full screen. It didn't wait for me as the user to interact with the message box. So if you want a message box and you want to wait for the user, you need to use the function called uiwait. So I'm going to put that back in. So we have a few main figures that we're talking about. And I think the thing that would be easiest is for me to go through and just put a reminder to myself, what are those main figures that I'm going to be starting with? And then that way I can go ahead and start coding them in. At this point, again, I know I have these main things that I'm going to be doing. So I need to be thinking about, okay, what's my method of how I'm going to go about this? So some of these things I might want to put into a separate function. So then it calls a function and it runs everything and it displays that information. Some things I might want to just put within this main script file. Now, where graphical user interfaces are very different from other script files is normally when we create a built-in function, you always open up a new script file and then you say the word function and you have the outputs, return variables, and then you have it equal to the function name. And then after the function name, we have our input arguments here. And then you have to name the script file the name of the function. For this case, you don't have to do that for all the functions that we create inside of this graphical user interface. It's a little bit different. So for this particular help information figure, this I might actually want to just throw into a different function because it's just going to be one figure. It opens, it closes. I just want it as basically like a pop-up window. And I'm not going to do that until the end because I'm not going to know exactly what my whole figure is going to look like until I make that screen of where I'm playing and interacting with the game. So for now, I won't have a help message. And I can just put a note here to myself to pop up help message. Or not. I could also just say something in this message like there will be a question mark on the top right of your screen. If you have any questions, concerns, you can hit the little button, the question mark button, or I could expect it to be intuitive to my user and just say, I'm going to expect you to click on that little question mark and that'll pop up the help message. However I want to go about this, that's up to me. But I just need to make a note to myself of like, I need to do something with the help message at some point. Again, I'm putting it on the back burner. That way it doesn't have to be my focus. Also, to be honest, it's not something that's super interesting to me. I'm not sitting here thinking like, I can't wait to do that help message. So I'm putting it on the back burner. That way I'm like, yes, I will do it, but I don't want to start with something that's demotivating. I want to start with something in this program that's going to get me excited. Why did I actually start this project in the first place? Now, if somebody told you and said, you have to do this project exactly as it is, that's a little tougher because you don't really have that initial, like, this is what I selected, but hopefully you can still find something in that project that you will find interesting. And I do recommend start with that. A lot of times it's easier to put more time into what you're working on if you're more motivated to do it. So again, picking something that you're interested in would be really helpful if you have that option. And if not, at least find something that you are excited about. What excites you about this program? So something about this program that gets me excited is I'm excited to write that computer side where I have to create this computer user and maybe have different levels of difficulty. I'm excited for that actual gameplay component. So I don't want to spend too much time on this like front and back end, like high scoring. And I am a little excited to get into that later, but I don't want to go there yet because I don't even have the data. I don't even have the game in place. Like I really want that game first. One thing with a lot of coding or graphical user interfaces, especially, is Control-C, Control-V is your friend, or Command-C, Command-V. So you're going to be using a lot of that. If you're not, then take a step back and think about like, okay, where am I rewriting things that really I could just be copy and pasting? So for instance, I am going to create a figure. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the figure I have here, and I will make sure to rename it because that's one problem with copy paste. You want to make sure you're renaming things. As far as names, I prefer picking variable names that are going to mean something to me. So what is it that I'm doing here and when am I going to remember what it is that I did? Because I'm going to have so many variables and I don't want to have all these variables that are just A, B, C, B, A, D, and I have no idea what any of these mean. I want to have something that I can remember it. But I also want to avoid way too long names because I don't want to have to keep retyping them. Again, Control-C, Control-V are your friends. So I can just copy and paste my variable name everywhere I want to use it. Sometimes it may be more convenient just to type it in. So again, think about that. One of the downsides of typing in your variable name is a lot of times you'll end up accidentally having typos in the variable name. And if you don't carry that same typo throughout, it's not going to reference the same variable or any variable at all if you don't define the typoed version or the non-typoed version, whatever your original is. So for this one, I don't want it full screen. So right here, I'm using a variable that I've defined here. So it's important that I actually set the screen positioning. I don't like using pixels if I'm hard coding in where something is going. I prefer to use what's called normalized, which is everything in a percentage. So I'm going to be doing this percentage version since I'm just going to be hard coding where this is going to go. So let's just say like a fourth of the way in. So keep in mind my first two are my position, my next two are my size. So I'm going to just try 0.5, 0.5. Again, the nice thing is you can always just test things out. If you don't know that this feature is in MATLAB, it's extremely helpful for testing. So I can put in 2% signs. You see that my screen went yellow here. And these 2% signs, what it does is it splits it into sections. So now I have this section and I have this section. So I can run this section by itself. So it does my little pop-up message, and then I have this figure. I like where this is, and I'm pretty sure I have enough room to put in my buttons. I'm happy with it. I can put pretty big buttons and show like the 1-player, 2-player, and later maybe like select the type of little picture or something that I want. If they want X's or O's, all that different information can go here, and collecting their player name if I want to do that here as well. So it's enough room, but again, it's not like overwhelming the whole screen right away. So I'm kind of building into that. I can do everything the same color. I can do different colors. As I said, I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about colors. I might just put some random different colors as I go through, just because I like them. Okay. Another thing that I want to talk about, this time I ran, so that's why everything went real quick and just popped up instead of running the section. This stupid message box is going to get really annoying. Every time I run the code, I have to deal with that. So I'm just going to comment it out. And I really recommend doing that. If there's something in there that's annoying you, like a message box that you don't really need, it's just there for your user, just comment it out for a while. That way you don't have to deal with it and you can just skip by it. All right, so this is time for our first button that we're going to be putting on there. So I'm going to just start out with my two buttons. My one that's going to be, do you want player versus player or player versus computer. So since I only have 2 of them, I'm just going to hard code both of them in. When I get to tic-tac-toe, I'm going to have a place where I have a lot of different buttons. I'm going to have 9 different buttons of the same size in similar positions. So I'm going to show a cool way of using a for loop to create all of those. That way I don't have to just copy and paste and reassign hard-coded places of where everything goes. And that I think is a lot of fun to do with graphical user interfaces when you have a lot of buttons. uicontrol is going to be one of the main functions that we are using throughout this whole graphical user interface. So style is just one of the properties of uicontrol. And as we're going through uicontrol, I'm going to talk about some of the properties, but the different troubleshooting and ways of approaching coding that I've talked about in the figure video is going to be the same thing I'm doing with uicontrol. So on uicontrol, I can look at the properties, decide which ones I want to change, and then what I can change them to. For this particular GUI that I've decided to do, a lot of the stuff I'm going to be doing is going to be push button. I will try to integrate in some other uicontrol styles. For the most part, you'll be seeing a lot of push buttons. So remember what I talked about with copy paste. So for this, I want units normalized again. So I'm going to come up here and copy it. I really could even copy this whole thing here if I wanted to do that. So now I already have my normalized units, I have my position, and obviously I don't want to just leave the same position. I'm going to change this, think about what I want. So I'm thinking I probably want to take up about half of the height for starters, and then maybe like a quarter of my width. So I want to go ahead and change this width to a quarter. And then that way you can also see that it's controlling the width and the height. So the actual button itself, I'm going to have one to the left and one to the right of the screen. So I'm going to have them both also the same bottom to top position, which is going to be here. So I'm going to leave that alone. And this one I will change. So I can have them right up against each other. I don't think it'll be a big deal. So let's go ahead and start with this at a quarter in. And again, it's going to be taking up a quarter of the screen this way. And then the other one will be a quarter in, taking up a quarter of the screen to the other direction. I could make sure that I have a little bit of space between, or I could not. It's not a huge deal. Before I do anything fun with these buttons or put any words on them, I'm just going to start out with the basic button. So again, remember I said from left to right, I'm going to want to change that so it goes a little bit further over. So I want to start at the halfway position, so it goes from half to 75%. So then I can run this, and so I see my 2 buttons. Could it be in a better position? Possibly. Thinking about what I want to have here. Maybe I want to space it over a little bit. We can go ahead and try that. A lot of this, again, might be some playing around with it and seeing what you like. So here I just shifted them a little bit, and then I like how that looks a little bit better. Now they look really tall. I don't really need that big of a button. So I could make them a little bit shorter, or I could make them a little bit wider and take up even more of the screen. And I want to think about, how do I want to ask my user which one they want to do? I might want to put text at the top to give them some context of like, hey, what would you like to do? Player versus player, player versus computer. Or I might want to just do pictures in there. I can do all sorts of different things. So let's go ahead and try one approach. Before I continue on this, I do want to show that right here, again, just like we had in the figure, I can see all the properties here. If I click all properties right now, it's going to give me an error. The reason is I've already closed that figure, so the object no longer exists. So it says I'm referring to a deleted object. And again, I want to take all of this because I still have to assign that position every single time. And this time I want to put it up at the top. And I probably want to span almost the whole screen. And always remember to add these together to make sure that they make sense. So for instance, if I'm 80% up the screen and then my thing is 12.5% tall, I'm going to be 92.5%. If I'm adding those up and I'm going over 100% and I'm using those units normalized, then I'm not going to be within that figure. So I need to be careful of that. Now, as far as the actual text, I can see how far this goes, what this looks like. I can just start with that for now, again, just to test it out. So you see my background is gray. I can change it if I would like. So I'm not going to close the figure this time. So I'm not closing the figure this time. And I'm going to go ahead and say show all properties. And I want to show all properties on this text, not on the push buttons. We'll get to those later. So then I can see what all properties I can change. So right here is my background color. And on my background color, that's where I'm getting this gray. So remember, all ones is when I'm white. So all ones white. I'm really close to white, but it's not white. So I want to go ahead and change that background color. I can pick something the same, that way it doesn't really stand out, or I could pick something different so then it does have a separate little box that you're seeing the picture in. I'm going to go ahead and just pick the same exact color as my main color here. That way it doesn't even show up as like a separate thing. So to my user, it just looks like text on my figure. So one thing I'll say is that right now I'm starting to go way over on the window, so I can't see everything all in line. So one thing that's helpful is knowing that you can continue code. I'm going to go ahead and do it right here. So I can put 3 little dots and then, whoops, I only got 2. So I can put 3 little dots and then I can continue that line of code. So that means that this whole function is still continuing all throughout here. And that way I can just keep writing and stay within that same screen. So I could do the same thing up here if I wanted to also. So then it knows, okay, keep going, keep going. This one, I don't really need that continue there anymore. So again, this just helps for readability as I'm going through and writing this code. All right, back to my background color. So right now I have this hard coded in, and I can just copy and paste what I have hard coded in here. But if I decide to change this color, and then I'll have to remember to change the color here. So sometimes that can be a little bit annoying. So places like this, it might be a good idea to actually start having this be a variable. So I could say color player select, or player select screen, or color figure 1, color screen 1. Let's do player select screen. It's kind of a weird name, but that's okay. If I really cared a lot about that color I had, it'd probably be a good idea for me to copy and paste it first. I'm pretty sure that was the color I have, not positive. And if it's different, that's okay. In fact, I wish it was a little bit of a brighter blue, so I'm going to actually increase this anyway. All right. Now my text is really hard to see, but I'm still working on it. So again, a lot of this is going to be trial and error, and you just have to learn to be patient. If you're deciding to go the GUI approach, there's going to be a lot of patience and frustration involved. So, going in, which is again why I started with that message box, which is just one of the many dialog boxes. There's a lot of really cool dialog boxes. I go through them in some of my videos. I can go through them more. If you are interested, just comment, let me know, and I'd be happy to cover more dialog boxes. But just know those are an option. All right, so here I have my font name and my font size and my font angle. I'm not going to angle my text because I don't want it to be all crooked looking. I just want it to be simple, to the point, showing up. But I do want a larger font size because right now it's really small. So that is one of the properties I would like to change. So I can come over here and say, yeah, let's go down to the next line because again, it's starting to take up too much space. And let's just jump up to a 22 to see what that looks like. And that might be a little bit too big, but again, some of this will be some trial and error. Font size. So the other thing I would like to change is my text color. So I'm looking through right now to look at my properties. So one thing is my font weight. That's going to be if you want to bold it. I don't personally mess with font units, but there are other units on there. I'm guessing there's probably normalized units, which might be nice if you're planning on switching between different screens. That way you don't make the font too big if someone's using a phone and they're running your code, or if someone's using a much smaller screen or a much larger screen. I'm going to go ahead and change the font weight too, though. And here's one that I don't know. It says normal. I'm guessing bold would be the other option. I'm guessing I could probably do italic also, but I'm going to try bold out. There we go, foreground color. That's what I was looking for. So foreground color is going to be my font color. So again, remember, sometimes I don't remember the property names either. I don't use all of these different little tiny details when I'm creating a graphical user interface every single time. So it's more important that we understand the approach of how to make sure that we can go in and critique every little thing that we want. You know what, I'm going to try just a hint of red to see what it looks like, to see if it stands out more, see if I see that difference. And again, I hit run, so that full figure just popped up again. So there we go. The size is a little bit better and the bolding is a little better. The color, you can't really see the difference. I'm going to go ahead and change it again just for the purpose of looking at it. So I could do something like this. For me personally, it's really hard for me to look at. It's a lot of bright colors. So I'm just going to leave it again, more of a black. So for right now, I'm not really getting into any of this part yet. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. So when I run the code, that stops popping up. I'm just going to paste it into another script file that I'm not using right now. So I'm not worried about it. Once I'm done with my different UI controls and things I'm changing, I might want to put a semicolon just to suppress them. So I'm not going to be changing this text type anymore. The next big thing I really need to address is right now when I'm clicking this button, it's not doing anything. So I need to actually add functionality to these buttons. So I'm going to show you in here first where that is in the properties. Now, this is one that it is important to actually know ahead of time. It's really helpful to know ahead of time because you're probably not going to guess intuitively what it is, but I'm going to tell you it's one of these. It's showing up here, and it's the callback function. It doesn't say function in it, but I know that's where the function is. So I can do my callback function inside of here, the same way that I'm changing any other property. Later, we're going to talk about times where we need to put the callback function elsewhere. So I can set different features of these different buttons other places. So right now, I'm just going to do it on this button because all I need to know is that my user clicks that button, it's calling a function, or if they click the other button, it's calling a different function. Be careful that your ... doesn't show up inside of your apostrophes like I just did there inside of my string, because it won't work. It doesn't have that same functionality. So all the other ones I've been typically putting inside strings, or I'm putting numbers inside of brackets, but for callback function, it's a little bit different. I have to say what function I'm calling. So I'm going to call this one PVP play, and then I'm going to call the other one PVC play. Before I actually create those functions, I'm just going to show you, again, remember if you copy and paste, you update what you said you were going to update. So I'm going to just show you real quick. When I click this button, it's saying that this is an undefined function, which of course it is because I haven't created PVP play. So I need to actually create that function. So normally when we're creating programmer-defined functions, we have return variables over to the left. We don't do that in the case of graphical user interfaces. And I don't really care about putting end or not when I'm working with a programmer-defined function that I've created in another script file. But in here, it's very important because otherwise I'm going to get nesting functions. So I have my two functions here, and I still do have to put my inputs. So every time that we have any type of function that we're calling, these callback functions with the different buttons, they're actually going to be variables that are already being created through the process. So A and B is what I'm going to call them right now. And that way you can just see what they are. And then we'll talk about what they are. And then you can see the details of why we call them the different things. All right. So I'm going to create this click this PVP button, which again, it's hard to know that this is the PVP button because I haven't put any text on here. I haven't put a picture on here. I haven't done anything with it, but I promise we will get to that. So right here, I see A is equal to, and it says push button. And if you look, it says what the callback function is. It says a value of 1, which means I clicked it. So I can't click on all properties and just display it that way because A and B are nested inside of these different functions. But I can at least see the general idea of what they are. Action data with properties. So this first one, A. So A, this first variable, is always going to be the object itself. So a lot of times you'll see people put object or handle or something like that. And then on this next one, they always put event. And that means like what happened, which the object is just my button, the button itself. If I want, I could have these call the same one. So I could say PV, I don't really want to call it PVP and PVC if I do that though. So I could call this play mode. And I could have both of these go to the same one. Now, if we look here, all of this different information, right now, PVP play is different with the one that we had here. But now the way I just changed it, they're both going to be play mode. So I have nothing to identify this data with. So if you remember me talking about in the other video, I talked about user data as one of the properties within these UI controls, not user data. And so user data I can use to store different information. So for instance, I could call this PVP play, PVP selected, or whatever I want to call it, or just PVP. And then this one I can call, I can say my user data is PVC. So then that way I know they picked player versus computer or player versus player down here. So if I say object, that would pull up all the different properties. This is a little different because it's the first time I'm doing it here, but if I say object dot user data, not user date, user data. Remember, always look for those little typos that'll come up here and there. If I put that here, it's going to be different depending on the button I pick. So watch, let's run it. And first I'm going to pick the one that's PVP. Oops. And don't forget, whenever you go through and start changing names, change all of them. So let's try that again. So PVP, and it tells me this right here, object.userData is PVP versus this one is PVC. So if I have two different types of data, two different types of information that I want to go to two different types of modalities of playing, then I could put in a simple switch case or if statement. If you're not familiar with the string compare function or that comes up with any other function I use in this video, keep in mind that I have a lot of other videos covering the different functions that go into detail on these functions. So this should never happen. In every case, I should always be PVP or PVC because I only have two buttons and each of one of those buttons is triggering either PVP or PVC. But in this case, I didn't update PVC right away. So if I would have missed that, then this fprintf would have happened. Sometimes it might be helpful if you have an if statement where you're saying if this, else if that, to add an else and then just put like a little error message for yourself. So then if this ever comes up in your command window, you know that you did something wrong in your code with your logic. It's not something the user did necessarily. It's probably something that happened with how you created the program. So sometimes I like to do things like this just to be like little catches for myself. So at this point, I still have to finish these buttons up. I'm also going to have a major decision that I have to make down here. I have to decide for the PVP versus PVC, do I want to just have two separate codes so I can have one that's all PVP and one code that's all PVC? Or do I want to go to the same figure and just have everything run out of the same place? And how do I want to make that work? Do I want to call this as a function that I'm going to have embedded down here? Or do I want to call this as a function that's embedded in a different script file? Sometimes it's helpful to embed things in different script files just to keep yourself organized. Sometimes it's helpful to put it all in one script file. That way you don't have to flip back and forth between the 2 or 3 or however many. That's a decision that you will have to make just based on your own preferences. So for a lot of that, I'm going to say just try different ways. If you've only done this one way and you've done it the same way the whole time, but you haven't done it a lot and you get really frustrated, maybe try the other way of approaching it. And if you've already done it both ways, well, then think about which way you like better and go ahead and follow through with that and be okay with going that way. Right now I see event highlighted in yellow and underlined in red, and it even gives me a little note, and it tells me that this might not be used, and I'm not using it right now. And a lot of times I personally don't use event. If I'm not going to use this input argument, I still need to acknowledge that it's there. I don't need to acknowledge it with a variable to collect it though. I can actually put a tilde there, and that just says, I'm acknowledging that the way GUIs work in MATLAB is there's always going to be these 2 different variables that are getting sent in as a result of the click, action, whatever happens, but I'm not using the second one, so ignore it. Or you can just put a variable name if you're more comfortable with that. I like putting the tilde so I don't have to see that yellow and red and all the underlining. These ones I see just because I haven't suppressed the variables yet, and I still haven't because I'm not done with them. All right, so let's look at all these properties again. Now, if I just want to put text for the user to see, like PVC or PVP, I can just use the string property to add text. So if I run it, you'll see that that just came up on here. So then it tells my user that's player versus computer. I could do that. Or I have other properties. Let me run it again and not close out this time. So this is a property that I think can be kind of fun. So the CData property is one I can use to actually create an image or put an image on that button. So let's go ahead and see what that would look like. I'm going to change the CData on the PVP one and leave the string on the PVC one for now. That way you can see both options. Save that image. I need to go ahead and read that image in. So I'm using the imread function to go ahead and read in my image. And then I'm going to put that image here. So it's not quite fitting. One thing I can do is I could just make these a little bit wider. But then again, keep in mind I need to reset where I'm starting that. So scaling these different buttons, I've made this fit a little bit better, but it still doesn't quite fit. And I know that's going to change for every computer, which can be very frustrating. So we do have an option here, but it is kind of tedious. So I'm going to go through it just because I've seen a lot of people struggle with this and want to have that happen. So instead of assigning the CData here, I'm going to be assigning it later. And again, this is not an easy task, but if you would like to do this, this is the rabbit hole you can go down. So now I've gone through and I've changed it, and it actually does fit right on there. Doesn't matter what the picture looks like, it's going to fit based on the width. Now, the way that I did that is I went through and I changed my button to be pixels after the fact. So I've already done the position, did everything like that based on normalized. And then I went back and I said, okay, let's change it to pixels. And then once I change it to pixels, I say, okay, what's the width? That third column in my position. So then the number of pixels wide that my actual button is what I'm using to say resize my picture to be this width, and then I'm allowing that height to just default to whatever makes sense, scaling it based on that width. I could do the same thing in the opposite direction, so I could say based on the fourth column is the height, and then I want to do everything based on that height, and then just automatically make the width go to a default. So I'll show you the opposite, the other way of the height. So again, I would just go through the same process. I would say height, which would again be the fourth column of position. And then this would say NaN here, which would just mean go based on the other one. Don't control it based on this. And instead I would scale it based on height. So we can comment this out, run the code again. Oops. run the code again. And so then this is scaled based on height. And so seal will round up, so I'm rounding up. I obviously like how it looked better when it was scaled on width, so I'm going to go with that version. There we go. And so then I can do the same thing for PVC if I want to do that. So again, there's always going to be a lot of copy and pasting. So here I just did a bunch of copy and pasting. And because I did that, I missed a name change. Yep, right there. And I'm going to get rid of this string here. So now I have player versus player or player versus computer. So again, I have actual images instead of having to write text here. So once my player selects their modality, as I said before, I'm going to want to collect what is their name for each of the players. So I'm either going to pop up one text box just for this player, or I'm going to pop up two text boxes so I'm capturing each person's name. The other thing I want to do is I want to make sure once they click one of these buttons that both of the buttons are turned off. Since I want to turn the buttons off and I'm going to keep staying in that same image, now I need to move my callback. And the reason I'm moving my callback is I want both of these buttons to be input arguments for this now. So I'm going to start adding in more inputs. And in order to do that, I'm using those braces, not parentheses, not brackets, braces, to say I want this function, and then these are additional input arguments. When I have additional input arguments, then I have to match them up here. So if I have two additional input arguments when I'm calling my function, then I need to have 4 input arguments here. So now whenever my user clicks one or the other button, then I want them both to be enabled off. So they can still see them, but they can no longer actually activate them. So once they make that selection, it's done. And again, that's for either mode. So once they select one, they can't select them again. So you see they're enabled off. And what I could do if I wanted is I could leave it enabled on for the one they select, because I might like how that looks. So it is clear, like, okay, you selected this one. One of the problems is every time they keep clicking it, it's going to keep running this part of the code. Could be problematic, could not. It's not too big of a deal. Again, this is something to address and think about. So when I clicked PVC, it did not do that. Why? Because I haven't assigned that callback yet. Another reason testing is always good. So see, now it looks like the other one does. So as I said, I want a text box to show up. That way I can say, all right, who are you? I can put that text box here, or I can put the text box up here. It's dependent upon whatever I would like to do. If I put it up here, it needs to be another input argument on here, and I need to have it off at this point and then turn it visible on. I'm just going to put them embedded in here. Forget the name of the UI control. So I'm going to test it real quick. So again, in this case, I forgot the name of the type of UI control I was using. So I just said style and I said edit text because I was like, I think it might be that, but it might not. And then when I click here, it tells me this isn't even a style. And then it reminds me what are the styles I have to work with. And it's just edit. And if I just want to check real quick to make sure that's the one I want, I see here, and sure enough, that is the type of input that I would like, and that's what I want to work with. So now I just need to reposition it to where I want it, and I want to put text next to it so it says, what's your name? And you will notice I'm manually typing in units normalized every single UI control. I don't think there's a way to set it as normalized for everything. If there is, and you're watching me do this thinking, why are you doing it that way? It's so slow. Well, then please be sure to comment and tell me the faster way to do that. And to tell everyone else. And yes, I know I can copy paste. That's one way I could go about it. That's how I've done it on some of them. Some of them it's just inconvenient and I just go ahead and type it anyway. So it's always good to reference like where were my other objects, where did I put everything else? So remember PVP, I put it from bottom to top, left to right, bottom to top. So I put it at 0.25 starting from the bottom. So for this one, I want to make sure that I'm under that, but I don't want to be at the very edge of the screen. So I'm going to probably say 0.125 and give that a shot, and then only make it 0.0625 high. So I still need my left to right, and this one I'm going to probably do in the exact same position as the buttons up here. So this one I would probably want to do 2 over, and then that way that edit box is going to be right after where it says here's the text, and then it says fill in, have the edit box there. Now, anytime you have some type of input like this, you should error check it. So some way of controlling what is it that they're doing. I'm not going to do a lot of excessive error checking on this. I'm just going to assume whatever they put in is what their name is. Now, a big problem with what I'm doing here is there's no way for me to pass this data back to my main figure, that original figure I was at. I'm okay with that right now, because what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm just going to call my main game within this function. So I'm just going to send all the data from this function over somewhere else and say, hey, go ahead and run that function, and it's going to start a whole brand new figure for my full game. That means I won't be able to refer back to this exact script file and run this exact same thing. So I'm okay with that. I know going into that. But if I knew I wanted to stay somewhere within that original figure that I've created here, then it would be important that I actually put all of these UI controls and buttons and everything into the text instead of inside of the function. So we can try it like this first and see where those are putting. Okay, so I don't like where I put player 2 name. And then that should fix where it is. So now I see player 1 name, player 2 name, but it says player 1, so that means I need to change it to player 2. And again, I can change the font size if I want and all of those details. And as you're going through and doing this, it's probably a good idea to always refer back to places where you've already changed. So if you've already changed those properties, you might want to look back at places you've already done that. So if I'm looking here, I see font weight and font size. So then I'm checking there and I'm like, okay, font size, I'm right. And then I'm like font weight, and I'm like, oh yeah, not font style, font weight. So then I can change it here. And now if I run it again, I can see it. I'm happy with it. I could make this bigger. I could try to align this to the center as far as vertically, but I'm content with it. It is enough, and I can collect the information that I want. I'm happy with it. And again, the same player 1 text I will be doing when they pick PVC. So if I look at this here, when they pick PVC, it just says player 1 and then the name and the text here. I could shift it to be over here by just using the player 2 one and just changing it to say player 2. Changing all the player 2 to say player 1, but it doesn't really matter either way. But to be honest, it's kind of annoying me a little bit, so I am going to move it over there. I decided it's easier just to change the positions than to change all of the different places where I say player 1, player 2, just so I don't miss anything like the variable names or anything like that. And I like that better. So now I can move it. So ideally at this point, it's going to do something else next. So I need to trigger that launching the game. So once I have text here, I can just go based off the user hitting enter with the text, but that would require some intuitiveness that maybe I wouldn't expect from somebody, or I can just have a button that pops up down here and it's like, okay. And so once they hit that or start game, then once they click that, then it automatically goes on to the next thing. So again, keep in mind, I can't change once I've selected this here. I can keep editing the name, but you will see I put in the name, I select it again, it erased that name because it reran that code. So every time I click it, it's just going to erase everything out right there. And so then I need that start game button. So again, copy paste. So referencing the other thing, I am at 0.125 for all of these. So here I want to make sure I'm below that. And I probably want to be somewhere in the center. So I can say, okay, I'm going to subtract 0.125 from 0.5. Or I could go somewhere else. Like I could say 0.25. So I'm going to go see where that throws me and see if I'm happy with that. Which means my width is going to have to be that point. And for height, stick with the same that I had for these other ones. So let's start with that first, just to see if I like where it is. It's a little bit small. I kind of want it bigger, and I think I'm going to drop it down a little bit lower. That's better. So it's more noticeable. My spacing started to get a little bit crunched towards the bottom. So this is a place where now if I decide to shift everything up, it's going to be a little bit frustrating because now all of a sudden I have to move all of these heights up. So in the next one, I'm going to talk about using variable names for width, height, and all these different things. That way I don't have to go back and edit every single number. I'm okay with that. And then remember, I can just copy paste. Not sure if that'll fit, but let's try it. Didn't like that I missed a comma. Another problem again with copy paste. And that does fit and I like it, looks good. So start obviously doesn't do anything yet, but I have it there and I do want it to stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to change the color of it. RGB, remember red, green, blue. So if I want it pure green, 010. That will be a very bright green. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit. And remember, last finishing things, cleaning your code up, just suppress your different variables. Yay. I like how it looks, happy with it. Again, I have some functionality in there, still working on that though. So start game, I need to have a callback function. So start game. So the type of data I need to pass to my main GUI is going to be what's my mode, am I PvP or am I PvC? And then what is my player 1 name and my player 2 name if relevant. Since it's reading the text immediately and I need a delay in that, I'm going to have to put a callback on these different edit text boxes. So anytime I get stuck somewhere, I can always do stuff in another GUI. So for instance, here, I'm going to see when it's doing this callback. Okay. So now I'm seeing where it's triggering and I'm seeing where my problem is. So it is important that I send it as a UI control and then I pull the string here because I don't want to pull the string originally because it is nothing and I need to pull the string after it's triggered. So if I'm going to come back into my GUI, I can fix that problem here. So the player 1 string is always going to be my P1, but player 2 is going to be dependent upon, remember, if I'm PVC or not. I'm testing it here first, and once I get it working for my PVP, then I'm going to fix it and do the same thing in my PVC. So me moving over here should trigger that callback. PVC. Line 65. Oops. PVC. And that's why we test things a bunch, because we are bound to have a lot of errors. So that should trigger the callback again. But again, nothing's happening because this one's empty. So then when I click over here, I put in a name and I click, that triggers my start button, which then triggers all that. But that I can do later. And so then you see my player names are actually passing my data correctly. Now with graphical user interfaces, one of the most complicated things that you're going to face is just passing all of that data. So as I said, this one's working now. So then I want to do the same thing. So I'm going to take this player one callback and I'm going to put it over here. And this I'm just going to put in as empty because it doesn't even matter. I don't need to send anything in. And this I need to put as PVC. And this then goes away. So now let's test PVC. So I type in a name, I click off of it, and then it pops up my start button. Would I like the start button to be right under it? Because it might make more sense if it's right under there, maybe, but do I really care? No. And we see again that it did actually pass those names. So we got the names passing, it is working. One thing that I could do right now is I can change this text, click here, start button shows up, go up, change this text again, and click off, and it does actually change it to the later version of the text. But if I change the text again and I just immediately hit start, it did update it. Okay, good. Just checking. So again, triggered here, changing test to okay, hit start, and then we'll see if it pulls the okay or the test. And it pulls the okay, which is the most updated one. So that's good. So we know it's always going to pull our most recent data for whatever our user puts for their name. Yay. All right. So all of that was just that one landing page where we're picking PVP or PVC and collecting their names. And then we have to actually go over to the main game, which is going to be a whole other adventure. And we can actually go in and start coding tic-tac-toe. But again, I'm going to be trying to demonstrate principles that are going to matter through every GUI you ever create. So hopefully you're catching on to this idea of how to explore all the UI controls and what to do with those and how you can pass the data. Again, I got into passing some data that could be a little bit trickier and some data that was a little easier, how to trigger those function calls with the callbacks. So just keep in mind, there are a lot to do with graphical user interfaces. So our next video will be all about doing the tic-tac-toe game and getting into that main script file. And then after that, we'll eventually have the high scores. I don't know if I'm going to get the whole main game within one video. I will try, we will find out. But again, as you see on this one, sometimes it just takes time. It takes time to go through and actually understand what you're doing and making sure you're passing all the data well. And again, planning will be critical to thinking about how is this going to work out? What do I want to do? And when you make decisions, make sure that you're being mindful in all those decisions that you're making because they do have a huge impact on everything you're doing later.